How are you doing, Korey?
Man, I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Excited. I mean, this time of the year is always crazy. I think, it feels like summer's starting to wind down. Summer feels like it's gone by really fast this year for me. I don't know how you feel about that, but yeah, it feels like I always think of everything in terms of like training years, just because from training athletes, and it feels like school just got out. Um, and summer's flying by, and now everyone's getting ready to go back to school. So thinking about all of that, schedule changes and everything. So it's a crazy time, but it's good. It's an exciting time, I think.
Yeah, as a former professor, this is
Yeah.
always the summer where you're like, oh man, I gotta start getting getting classes. I was actually just emailing with a professor,
Okay.
and I kind of went through my head of like, oh, I know how he's feeling right now. He's
Yep.
like ready and all that stuff, but we are, we are expecting child number two soon, and
Even crazier time.
due date is September 1st. And it's realistic that she could come early, and I'm looking at
Right.
the calendar and I'm like, oh man, this is getting really so adds that adds another layer to it for sure.
Yeah, it's about to get real, right?
Yeah.
So, so yeah, I guess speaking of training, I guess as far as my comments, you guys have probably seen by now, we have a really interesting topic today. It's an aspect of training and performance that we all do and train for, but I don't think it ever gets talked about as in depth as probably what we're going to go in today. And we're talking about energy systems. So now, if you're not sure like what energy systems are, I guess the technical definition of it is basically it refers to the system or the mechanisms in our body that we use to produce energy. So if you're playing a sport or getting in some type of workout, you know that your body needs energy, and depending on the type of workout that you're getting in or the type of sport that you're playing, you probably feel like you have to use a different type of energy or a different level of energy for different activities. So that's what we're going to dive into a little bit more today. I guess bear with us. We're going to get a little more sciencey than usual on this episode of Trainer Talk. But to just kind of get us started, we have three different energy systems that our bodies go through: the phosphagen system, the glycolytic or glycolysis. We have the oxidative system, or also known as the aerobic system. So we're going to kind of go through and explain what each of those systems are and how our body uses those for different activities. So to get started, I'm actually going to let Korey help explain kind of the background and how energy is produced and how it's produced through ATP. I know that that's going to be a main factor of what we're talking about here. So
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned ATP, because when we're talking about energy, that's what we're talking about, like the actual molecule or compound that our body uses to perform work. So typically in performance, we think muscle, like the actual thing that allows our muscles to contract and to continue contracting so that we can keep doing the things we need to do: run, sprint, jump, lift, all those kinds of things. And going back to the energy system definition, these are just the kind of three primary pathways that have been identified through which we synthesize an ATP. Like this is how these are the primary ways we take the food we eat or the energy we store in the form of fat and carbohydrates to make more ATP. Like that's really what's happening here. So at the base level, why this is important, it's why it's important to understand, is that these are the things that underlie all of our performance.
right.
When it comes to the physical act of doing something.
Mm-hmm.
So that plays into, as you hinted, what is going to be relied upon to perform our activity. but then it also goes into the nutritional aspects of our sport or the activity that we're doing. And then when it comes to performance and physical development, what does this mean for our training?
Right.
That's like, it can get, sometimes it gets glossed over, but understanding, I think, some of the intricacies here, it impacts so many different things. So as you mentioned, we have three, primarily identified systems or pathways that accomplish this process.
Right.
Now, it's easy to really think of them in silos, switches, like, okay, we switch one and then we switch it off, and then another one gets switched on, and we switch it off, and so on and so forth. And in reality, all three of these systems are running all the time. Like, there's never one that's off and one that's on. It's more of like which one's rate is the high, and which one is being, I guess, relied upon the most. That's, I think, an important distinction to make right off the bat. So I'll just go, from the shortest, or, when we talk about these energy systems, it's like there's always a trade-off between power and capacity. So power means how fast can the system synthesize ATP or resynthesize ATP, and then capacity, how much can it make?
Right.
The most powerful system and the lowest capacity system is the ATP PC system, phosphagen system, I'll put back to different names. But this is the system we utilize for fast, explosive activities and movements. So think sprinting, jumping, lifting heavy weight explosively. Doesn't have to be heavy. It's just one process that we use creatine phosphate to make ATP, or I don't like the word make, because we don't really make energy, we transfer energy. We are making ATP so that muscles can keep contracting. Now, we have creatine in our muscle cells as we store it, all right? As one does. We have a base level of storage that, classically we think of being able to utilize creatine phosphate for around 10 to 12 seconds. That's like the classic time frame here. Right. So again, we use that system to keep making ATP if we've got to run a 100-meter dash, or if we've got to keep jumping over and over and over, or if we have 92.5% on our back in a back squat and we want to get that for as many reps as possible. Right. We need ATP quickly, we need it now, and we need it to keep going. So if you want to keep sustaining activity at a fairly high level, again, that system can only last for about 10-ish to 12 seconds. Well, if we want to keep going, we have to start to rely on something else, because ATP, or our creatine stores, are gone. So if we want ATP, we then switch to the glycolytic pathway, or glycolysis. It's our other anaerobics energy system that means we can make ATP without oxygen, without relying on oxygen. This is a pathway that can only use carbohydrates. That's, like, I think, the main thing to consider with the glycolytic pathway. We can't utilize amino acids or protein. We can't utilize fat. We can't use creatine phosphate. It can only utilize carbohydrates. Now, this is compared to the ATPP system, which is only one-step process. This has quite a few steps. If you've ever seen, I'm sure some of you are like, oh yeah, that one linear pathway in my textbook that I have nightmares about. But it's still pretty fast. Like, it can bring glucose pretty quickly, and it's has a little bit higher capacity, because we do get a little bit more ATP at the end of it, but not very much. The payoff of glycolysis actually comes a little bit later, due to something that it produces. But again, this system is a higher power system, so we're relying on it for maybe longer periods of time of still pretty high intensity work. So maybe like an 8 a mile, or down and back on a basketball court where it's just fast pace of play, meet rep ranges, but still using relatively heavy weights, power endurance based, where you are trying to still produce forceful contractions over a period of time. This is the system. So, classically we're thinking 30-ish seconds to a couple minutes where this system is running and keep you going. Now, the third system, the aerobic system, oxidative phosphorylation is kind of the nerdy term for it. This is the one that we'll utilize if we want to sustain activity, or if activity needs to be sustained for a longer period of time.
Okay.
And this is a system that we can use any energy substrate. So we can use carbs, proteins, or fats. All of them can be utilized for energy in this system. But it relies on enough oxygen being present to complete everything. So that's where the other two systems, they run in the, there doesn't need to be oxygen present for those to keep going. They just don't last long if you don't have enough of it. So this is by far highest capacity system, but its power is very low. So it's not very, it doesn't happen quickly, but we get way more ATP if we fully finish, the entire process. So, if we kind of finish with glycolysis, at the end of glycolysis, you get this molecule of pyruvate. Now, if we're running that 800, we're utilizing oxygen very, very quickly. We don't have enough of it supplied to the muscle to keep going. That gets converted to lactate. And if that goes, at a really high rate, that's when we start to get the muscle burning effect. Actually not due to lactate, that's a misnomer. It's actually due to hydrogen ions being created in the muscle. But let's say, you're gonna slow down after the 800, and you're gonna, for whatever reason, I don't know why you do this, you would keep running.
Right.
But you have to slow down. So, you're breathing a little bit slower, you're getting oxygen to the muscle in enough amounts. Then that pyruvate will go into the Krebs cycle. A bunch of things happen, and then the things created, the NAD and things created, will go to the electron transport chain, where we get a big payoff of a ton of ATP created. Right? And if we were to go, run long distance, run a marathon, anything that's truly endurance based, this is the primary system that is relied upon to create ATP, or make, keep ATP. And the reason it can do that is because it will primarily rely on, we can use fat here, like fat, we can utilize fatty acids in this system, and carbohydrates, like I said, anything. But fat takes a long time to break down and utilize, so that we can't utilize it. So that's, I guess, a breakdown of the three, the primary systems, and kind of like, all right, what are the components here? And what nutrients do they utilize, what activities they support. So I guess I'll stop there and ask if you have any follow-ups, additions, or anything like that.
I think first of all, I think if people have studied this, really any type of anatomy and physiology class at any level, I mean, you've heard about everything that Korey just talked about there. If you haven't, I think that's all very interesting, just because I think it's good. And one of the reasons I was interested in doing this topic was because I think it's important for everyone to, kind of know how our bodies work and how we're able to produce energy for different events. I think one of the takeaways that I think people should take from that is a lot of people try to limit their carbs for whatever reason. If they have this idea that they need to limit carbs for fat loss, but they still want to be able to perform at a high level. I mean, you just laid out right there how important carbs really are for our energy systems, and really for all of our energy systems that you just talked about there. I think where this becomes more relatable to, I guess, the general public or people that aren't as interested in getting into like the strict science behind it, is exactly how long you use each of those energy systems. And you talked about the phosphagen system. I mean, we're going, what, maybe 0 to 6 seconds, 10 seconds maybe, somewhere around there before you hit that glycolytic system, which is closer to 30. When I was thinking about this, it kind of reminded me of, I don't know, completely separate conversation, but kind of Mike Boyle's comments on, you know, if you want to be fast, train to be fast. And he might have changed his stance a little bit here, but kind of the only reason to train long distance is if you're running long distance. So it's important to be powerful all the time. So we're constantly using those, really those first two energy systems in, I would say, argue almost all sports other than kind of distance running or longer endurance events. I mean, is that kind of how you see that breakdown there?
Well, yeah, to your point about carbs.
Yeah.
Think about almost everything that we do other than the extremes.
Yeah.
Okay, one extreme, we've got powerlifting, particular event of powerlifting, where it's basically nine max attempts almost, or Olympic weightlifting, and like throwers, shot putters, javelin throwers. And then on the other end, we've got ultra distance, triathlon, marathon. Everything in the middle, almost everything we do is in the middle there.
Right.
So there's very few things that really predominantly rely on the creatine phosphate system and really predominantly rely on the oxidative system. So that means almost everything else is going to be kind of glycolytically based. We're thinking 15 seconds up to 2 to 3 minutes. That's almost everything.
Yeah.
As we identified, that system can only run on carbohydrates.
Right.
You can't use ketones. You can't use substrate or any other nutrient. Now, it's not to say, I know someone's probably thinking, well, I do keto and I do fine. Well, I cannot get into it today is the adaptability of these systems and human physiology in general. But what is not debatable is that glycolysis runs on glucose and carbs. So if you are someone who lives in the middle here, which is, again, almost all of us, carbs are important to, so whether through dietary means or making sure that you have glycogen stores topped up when you are trying to complete those activities, that's important. When we think about sports, we can get into training here. The system that's relied upon needs to be developed. So, and we can alter these systems nutritionally, and we can alter them through training. We know we creatine phosphate system through creatine supplementation. So we have a base store of creatine phosphate in the muscle that allows for that 10 to 12 seconds. We know if we increase our creatine intake, we can extend the time of that. Now, we could also extend, training-wise, we can't really impact that system from a creatine storage standpoint, but we can glycolysis and oxidative phosphorylation through training. And enhance efficiency. We can enhance the, basically their ability to work. And that's what we need to think about when it comes to training. So this has led to, I think, this idea of like sports specific energy systems training. I guess when you and I were going through sports in high school, it was very common for football players to run a mile. Like mile test, I think, we did like a 300-yard shuttle test. And rightly so, it's been identified that is not a good barometer for your fitness level for the sport of football, American football, because American football is a glycolytically based intermittent sport. So why would we do essentially an endurance test that's not intermittent to assess like our conditioning level? Better things like more intermittent tests, or the training for it is more intermittent in nature.
Mhm.
And that means it's reflecting the time period you're actually doing the activity. So maybe 5 to 10 seconds, and the time period that you are not doing the activity, 30 to 45 seconds. So then the question becomes, do I only ever train in those work-rest ratios, and do I only ever focus on glycolysis or glycolytic-based training?
Mhm.
This is where my thoughts have shifted over the years. I know there's varying camps here when it comes to how we need to focus on energy systems. But I do want to go back to some of the, I guess, physiology for a second. So when we're resting, when we're not doing anything, we've got to really top up and restore ATP. Okay.
Mhm.
We've got to restore creatine phosphate. So let's say we just sprinted as long as we could, as far as we could.
Right.
We've depleted creatine phosphate. Now, if we want to keep doing that, we've got to resynthesize it. So the way that we do that during rest is via ATP created by our aerobics. So the process of creatine phosphate donating a phosphate to ADP, which creates ATP,
right?
It's reversed. ATP can donate a phosphate to creatine to recreate creatine phosphate. It's a two-way reaction. The ATP we use in recovery to accomplish that is ATP created through the aerobic system. That's an important aspect here, because the more efficient our aerobic system is, the faster that process can occur. And this gets in the muddy. Okay, well then how much do I focus on our aerobic system? And we're probably not going to get into that today, so to speak.
Right.
What I do think it means is that even if you are a strength power athlete, an intermittent sport athlete, to say that you should never improve or focus on that system is probably not the best way to go.
Right.
Where I don't know, if Mike Boyle still has these beliefs, or some of you may have heard of Tony Holler, who is another person who is very if you are a strength power athlete, you only do strength power things.
Yep.
You don't ever go the other way. Now, if any followers are watching or listening, he does believe that there should be some times of the year where you're developing the aerobic system.
Sure.
Regardless. But what can't be denied is that this occurs. The fact that we replenish anaerobic systems via the aerobic system is not undeniable. So that's where I think my idea has shifted over the years when it comes to sports.
Okay.
It's maybe this whole idea of the quote unquote building the aerobic base. I 10-ish years ago, and maybe even as recent as just, I guess it's still out there, that was just kind of seen as antiquated. Yeah. Well, you don't need to do that. I think some people are just kind of bringing up this physiological thing that happens and saying, hold the phone, we should pay attention to this. But I think that how you do it also matters too, right? And I don't know what some of those ways in which you can do that, but this gets into periodization, analysis of sport, when are you going to do certain things at certain times of the year. But again, that's why it's important to understand these systems, not only for knowing which one are you going to rely upon based on what you need to do, but if you know a little bit deeper, it will dictate how you train.
I think that brings up an interesting point. While you were talking, it made me think about a sport like soccer, where it's been documented, and I forget the exact number, but soccer players are running almost a marathon, or they're out on the field, on the pitch for an extended amount of time. So they do have to have that capacity. But at the same time, if you think about, like, most likely, not all the time, but most likely, who are your better soccer players? They're probably soccer players that can sprint the fastest and get down the field, try to get away from a defender. So it's interesting in thinking about the different ways that you have to train athletes in multiple areas to be good at their sport. Like we talked about before, a sport that I deal with quite a bit now is tennis. You think, that the average point in a tennis match is going to be maybe 8 seconds. I know it's documented 8 to 10 seconds. If you think about lower levels where that skill level might not be as good, that point's going to be even faster. So the way that I think about training tennis players is you have to be able to move in short bursts. You're not moving that far in the span of a point, but at the same time, if take high school for example, if your tennis match goes 3 sets, you could be talking, depending on how competitive it is, you're talking about a tennis match going 2 hours maybe sometimes. So you have to have the capacity to be able to endure that long, to be able to last through that match. So I think the different nuances, and to your point, kind of some of the new research coming along, or some of the new ways of thinking in training different sports, is maybe starting to come around a little bit to the idea of maybe we do need more of a mix of training those different systems, even though you think of a sport being more powerful, more quick bursts as far as the movements that you're using. I'm thinking of another, baseball and softball. I know a lot of, I've heard of a lot of high-level baseball programs where they have to go through a 2-mile test at the beginning of the season. I've never trained a baseball player that way, but at the same time, these programs that are doing it are much higher level than what I've trained at the same time. So if you think about it that way, they have to do a 2-mile endurance test, but how far are you really running or sprinting in a baseball game? The most might be, obviously base path's about 90 feet. I suppose if you're a right fielder and have to run all the way over to left field for some reason, you might be sprinting a little bit farther. But so it's just interesting in the nuances of training different sports and how you would want to train different systems in that respect.
Yeah, baseball is a great example because it's one of the few team sports that very, very far to that ATP PC system. Again, relied upon in competition to do your thing, throw, sprint, and like a 2-mile test to assess if someone is ready for that, or if they have the quality and capacity to do that, doesn't tell you that. Now, now, does it mean you never do endurance in training? I don't know if that's the case. Again, think about, I remember I was a catcher, double headers. My like overall, if I am more fit aerobically, those games have less of an impact on me physically.
Sure.
Because, you do get a long time to recover, but think about the intensity of like running a triple. Yeah. That is so intense. And I would argue it takes it out of you like crazy.
Oh yeah.
And there's still going to be moments you just never know. Like, so there's this concept in conditioning called train for the worst case scenario. And so that's kind of like, think about, all right, when you're making or progressing up to conditioning protocols, where's this going to get to? So sometimes it's been proposed, all right, think of like the worst case scenario that you're going to face if you're in American football, 20-play drive, 25-play drive against a up-tempo team, 2-minute drive. That's something you need to touch. You need to incorporate at some point. Again, progress up to it, yada, yada. Baseball, What if I run that triple and then the first pitch is hit? Well, I got to be ready to go right away again. Now, should you always do that? No, but you need to sprinkle it in. And again, if I have a better developed aerobic system, meaning it's efficient, the enzymes are there in enough quantities to make that system run efficiently, and then I can replenish ATP of my or creatine in my anaerobic systems better. That's beneficial, but I would not use it as a test for sport readiness.
Sure.
Like, I guess here's how I would think of it. Let's use baseball and really anaerobically based sports as an example.
Okay.
I would say, as counterintuitive as it seems, during the earliest portion of the off season, if you're lucky enough to have that as your or season or year-long model,
right?
Multi-sport athletes get trickier here, but I almost want to have it. It might be a good idea to have it at those periods of time where going to be the period of time in the weight room, so to speak. You're focused on strength and power, maybe hypertrophy if it's relevant.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't want to also include like sprint training at that time or heavily glycolytic based anaerobic based training at that time, because now you're like, those are the systems you're focusing on in the weight room. Mm-hmm. So by almost going to the other end of the spectrum and quote unquote building the aerobic base, mm-hmm. you're crossing the stream, so to speak, if to use a Ghostbusters. You're practicing the work you're doing in the weight room. So the question that a lot of people will raise here is, well, what about the interference effect? So the concept that if I'm giving my body two different signals in which to adapt to, then neither one of them is going to do what I want. So if I'm endurance or aerobic based and strength and power based training at the same time, mm-hmm. will I decrease the adaptation for both of them rather than focusing on one at a time? It's a valid point, because we know from a cellular perspective, there's signaling happening that will indicate this. Like, whoa, well, both things are happening. I can't commit resources to either adaptation. I think it's been shown pretty clear that unless you're a highly trained athlete, not necessarily high level, because you can be and not be a highly trained athlete.
Fair point.
You can be one Olympic pro sport athlete and have a very low training age. So unless you are a high training age and a very, very, very specific athlete, Olympic sprinter, thrower, or you're only one sport athlete, almost none of us fall into that camp.
Right.
Powerlifters have discussed this. Olympic weightlifters have discussed this. They've seen this. CrossFit has absolutely. You've got CrossFit athletes who have incredible endurance, who get 400 pounds over their head.
Right.
So, I would say for the vast majority of us, the interference effect is probably not a huge deal. Mm-hmm. So think of the athletes you're working with, the college athletes you're working with, even if it's D1. Mm-hmm. Again, unless they have a high training age, this highly specific, high specificity, and worrying about the interference effect is probably not something you need to worry about too much. The only thing I would say there is, yes, once you get close to your sports season, your training will be the most specific. But I don't think we need to worry too much about developing the aerobic system in periods of time where we're really trying to build strength and power.
Right. No, that's an excellent point. And I'm thinking of, say a sport like basketball. Similar idea. You have to be able to be quick. You have to be able to sprint the full length of the court. But at the same time, say you're on a team that doesn't have a very deep roster, or your teammates get in foul trouble. I mean, you're kind of stuck out there on the court, looking over at your coach saying, hey, like, I need a break here, and you have to stay out there. So that's a good point where you need to be able to build up that endurance a little more. Or maybe, I guess another way to look at that, you're building up your aerobic capacity. When I was assisting with training a college basketball team, I remember one of the things that we did was we trained for recovery in that respect. So we made sure that their muscular endurance was good enough to obviously be able to last the entire length of a game. But we were able to, and this might get into a different discussion, but train their heart rate recovery to a degree where, say, they were obviously sprinting up and down the court, they were able to get near full recovery, during a free throw or during a quick 30-second timeout, whereas other teams that maybe weren't trained that way, I mean, they were gasping for air, towards the end of the first half, and especially into the second half. Our team was fresh and ready to go and just burning right past their opponents just because of the way that they were trained. So, I mean, that heart rate recovery I think it touches on this, but that might be getting into a different conversation. But at the same time, just training capacity at all levels is going to help an athlete like that.
I mean, this is the same discussion.
Yeah.
It would be an indicator of an efficient aerobic system.
True.
When we're exercising, why do we even need to increase heart rate at all? We need to increase heart rate because we need oxygen going to the muscle. So once you get to a point where there's enough supply of oxygen to do what you need to do, resting or low activity. So the faster you recover, that's an indirect indicator of the efficiency of the aerobic system.
Mm-hmm.
So a team or an individual that does not have that, their heart rate is going to have to remain elevated for a longer period of time in order to try to get oxygen to the muscle so that they can recover in between bouts. Mm-hmm. So I'm really glad you brought that up because that's something that if you're a coach, you can monitor this. If you're an athlete, you can pay attention to it. So no, I think that's very relevant to our discussion here, and that's another aspect that we haven't. That's another aspect of the whole conditioning puzzle that's beyond it. Is cardiovascular adaptations, because there are other adaptations that happen cardiovascularly that are part of this puzzle, right?
There's so many nuances in training, so many tangents that we can go off of. I say tangents, but they're all related to each other. So I don't know, maybe that's a good idea for another trainer talk that we can go a little deeper into that. For now, though, I know we've been going on for a little while. Thank you for everyone that's watching that kind of stuck with us through this conversation. I do think it's a really good conversation that everyone should have, whether you are thinking more science related or just on the surface of training your athletes, or if you're an athlete getting prepared for your sports season. It's always something to keep in mind that kind of that crossover between the different energy systems, how the energy systems work, just exactly what's going on in your body. So great insight by you today. Thanks for all of your knowledge. And I think that's probably a pretty good spot to kind of cut it off at. So
absolutely. So if I could point people to some resources if they wanted to learn more. So I think there's two resources that will kind of, I guess, satisfy the direction you want to go. Smarter Training by Pete McCall. He breaks stuff down really, really well. Just like what are all the physiological aspects that we need to do, or that we need to take into account when it comes to our training. And then if we want to target, say a certain system or whatever, what can we do from a training perspective? Mm-hmm. So Pete's book is more on the fitness end. If you want to go deep, if you want to get nerdy, if you want to go sports nutrition by Asher Jukendrup. I mean, I don't think there's better text out there when it comes to that. break down the pathways, the physiology, the biochemistry. What does that mean for sport? Like it's one of the best out there. So I would say, again, Smarter Training by Pete McCall, Sports Nutrition by Asker Jukendrup. Those are your go-to.
Excellent resources. I hope everyone checks those out. Definitely another one here I have handy right here that breaks down the bioenergetics. Definitely, definitely check that out. I think it's actually chapter 3 in that book. So, but I'm sure anyone that's in the training world already has probably checked that one out specifically.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I would also add the NSCA PT, the new edition of the NSCA.
the new edition. Right. Yep.
Question in the comments repeating Pete's book. Smarter Training is the name of Pete's book.
I think is it Smarter Workouts?
Smarter Workouts. Yeah. Sorry.
Smarter Workout. There we go. Yeah. No, but Pete's a good guy. He has a few books with us. Another one coming soon that might be another topic that we can talk about. So I'm excited about that one as well. But yeah, thanks for all of your insight today. Thanks for everyone for watching. Hope you got a lot out of it, and we will talk to you guys soon.
Okay. Right. Thank you.